Hey, let's begin with Newland's law of octaves. In the year 1864, Newland arranged the known elements in the order of increasing atomic masses and found that the properties of every eighth element are similar to the properties of the first element. Based on this observation, Newland gave his law of octaves for the classification of elements. According to Newland's law of octaves, when elements are arranged in order of their increasing atomic masses, the properties of the eighth element, starting from a given element, are a repetition of the properties of the first element. This repetition in the properties of elements is just like the repetition of a eighth note in an octave of music. So it is known as the law of octaves. Newland divided the elements into horizontal rows of 7 elements as shown in the following table. Now, if we start with the lithium as the first element, we find that the 8th element from it is sodium. And according to Newland's law of octaves, the properties of the 8th element, sodium, should be similar to those of the first element, lithium. It has actually found that lithium and sodium have similar chemical properties. Again, if we take sodium as the first element, then the eighth element from it is potassium. So, according to Newland's law of octave, the properties of potassium should be similar to sodium. So, it has actually been found that sodium and potassium have similar chemical properties. In fact, all three elements, lithium, sodium, and potassium, have similar chemical properties. Newland could classify elements only up to calcium in this way. As more new elements were discovered, they could not be fitted into the octave structure. Newland's classification of elements based on his law of octaves, however, gave an important conclusion that there is some systematical relationship between the order of the atomic masses and the repetition of properties of elements. There are some limitations of Newland's law of octaves, and let's discuss them. Newland's law of octaves was applicable to the classification of elements up to calcium only. After calcium, every eighth element did not possess the properties similar to that of the first element. Thus, Newland's law of optical worked well with the very lighter elements. Newland assumed that only 56 elements existed in nature and no other elements would be discovered in the future. But later on, new elements were discovered whose property did not fit into the Newland's law of octaves. So now let's discuss the third one. In order to fit element into his table, Newland put even two elements together in one slot and that two in the columns of unlike elements having very different properties. For example, two elements cobalt and nickel were put together in just one slot and that two in the columns of elements like fluorine, chlorine and bromine which have very different properties from these elements. So now let's discuss the final one. Iron elements which resembles cobalt and nickel-like properties were placed very far away from these elements. So these are some points for limitations of the Newland's law of octaves. I hope you enjoy my lecture. See you in the next video. Share with #Mathdoctor. Thank you.